Hey y'all, I'm CQ and this is Spirit Gumbo, the podcast where we stir the spiritual pot with truth, spice, and sass. In today's episode, we're talking about ripples of change and how one person can make a difference. We'll start with a gumbo bite, one love, one heart. Then it's story time with CQ, Snowstorms and The End. After that, we'll move into the main theme, one person can make a difference, followed by a tarot truth bomb, a spirit side-eye, performative posting isn't helping Karen, and close with a reflection on choice, agency, and the quiet ripples we create every day. So, grab your candle, sip your tea, and let's get into it. This ain't just talk. This is Spirit Gumbo with CQ. Before we jump in, I've got a quick disclaimer for you. Don't worry, it's not dramatic. Deep breath, everyone. This isn't catastrophic, I promise. First off, I want to thank all of you for your support. This podcast isn't just a quote-unquote job to me. It's a life passion and purpose. Thank you for being here with me through the growing pains. Second, have you guys noticed how much more animated I've become? Because I sure in the heck have. I'm growing into this podcast and I'm recognizing just how important my voice is. And that realization has led to some dynamic changes moving forward. I want you to know that this decision wasn't made lightly. I've been sitting with some of this for the past few months and have finally come to a decision. I know. Some of you are probably thinking, get to the point already. You're killing me, Smalls. I've said in the past that this podcast won't deal with politics. And that still is true in the sense that my personal political beliefs are mine and mine alone. I was raised in a time period where who we vote for is private information, and that's something I'm sticking to. However, I will be shifting into topics that may feel uncomfortable for some people. The state of the world is changing, and there are things that need to be talked about in a healthy way. I'm at a place in my life where I can no longer keep silent. So, what exactly does that mean? Well, for starters, I may begin referencing current events in the context of the things we talk about here. I may reference politics in a broad, general way. Why the disclaimer? Because I understand how uncomfortable change can be. Things can feel a little wobbly when you're used to a certain format and then boom, things shift. I want to stress that this space will stay as safe a container as I can make it while we discuss harder topics. Keep in mind though, this is still a podcast. I'm not here to debate people's beliefs. Here are a few of my core truths to help you understand why I feel these changes are necessary. First, I tend to approach the world from a very neutral center. That means I value perspective and awareness over picking sides. Neutrality for me isn't about apathy or not caring. It's about recognizing that most things are more complex than a simple right or wrong. I believe people have the right to their own beliefs, their own experiences, and their own conclusions. My role here isn't to convince anyone of anything. My role is to share perspective, ask questions, and explore ideas in a thoughtful way. Another core truth for me is discernment. I believe it's important to look at the world with open eyes, curiosity, and critical thinking. Not everything needs to turn into a fight, and not every difference in perspective needs to turn into division. Sometimes growth simply comes from being willing to look at things from another angle. With that said, I'm not quite ready to put on a tinfoil hat full time and start talking about aliens. Maybe in the future. But today, we are going to talk about something just as important: how real change actually happens. All right, now, here's your gumbo bite for today. Something short and spicy to stir into your soul. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. Jimi Hendrix. One love, one heart, let's get together and feel all right. Bob Marley. These are two tenets that I keep locked in my heart. But when I take off the rose-colored glasses and really look at the world around me, I can't help but notice how easy it is to divide and conquer. When our differences, rather than our commonalities, are constantly being highlighted by those in power. Politics, religion, and identity are used as tools to keep people reactive and fragmented. And this type of emotional manipulation has been used for years. Because when people stay emotionally charged, they stop thinking clearly. And when people stop thinking clearly, they become easier to influence, easier to divide, and easier to control. And the real question we need to ask is, who benefits the most when the population is easier to control? Does the population benefit? Is our world a better place when we're at each other's throats? Stuck in a constant, I have it worse comparison? I don't think so. And this is where the shift in thinking needs to happen. Shifting the narrative and questioning what's gained from constant division doesn't mean believing life is suddenly going to be rainbows, kittens, and cotton candy. It means becoming aware of an emotionally manipulative pattern and being willing to ask what's actually behind it. When I look around at the world, the lack of questions is really starting to bother me. I've always been someone who questions things in order to understand them. Have I received answers I don't want to hear? Absolutely. But I've also learned and gained wisdom. Authority without wisdom is like a heavy axe without an edge. Fitter to bruise than polish. Anne Bradstreet. Now, take that with you and stir wisely. Storytime with CQ, Snowstorms and The End. As I mentioned during the Gumbo Bite, I've always been someone who asks questions. Unfortunately for my mother, when I was growing up, it was usually at bedtime. Yeah, I was that child. I was also the kid who had some really weird thoughts. I remember one time, I was probably around 11, having this profound realization like, what if we're just figments in someone else's imagination? And then it kept going. What if they're figments in someone else's? What if we're just figments in figments in figments? My poor mom just looked at me like, what? I think it's time for you to go to bed. When I was a kid, two of my biggest obsessions were Nostradamus and the Mayans. Nostradamus was a French astrologer, apothecary, and physician who was also known as a seer. He is best known for his book, Les Prophéties, published in 1555, which is a collection of prophetic quatrains said to predict future events. And then there were the Mayans, a Mesoamerican civilization that existed from antiquity into the early modern period. They're known for their temples, their glyph-based writing system, which is actually one of the most advanced in the pre-Columbian Americas, and for their achievements in art, agriculture, mathematics, and astronomy. They're also the creators of the Mayan calendar. For context, when I was growing up, the leading interpretations of Nostradamus's predictions pointed to the early 2000s as the end. And the Mayan calendar? That was said to predict the end of the world in 2012. I know what you're thinking. CQ, where is this going? Well, I'll tell you. While I was growing up, researching these two topics, I was also being inundated with religious predictions about the quote-unquote end of the world from family members. So, when you add all of that together, I genuinely believed the world was going to end sometime in the early 2000s. And that led to some pretty big questions. It made the world feel like a really scary place, one that I had absolutely no control over. I remember, for a few years at least, even questioning whether I wanted to have children. And that was huge for me because when I was little, all I ever wanted to be was a mother. But how could I bring children into a world where there would be chaos, famine, war, and then a big boom at the end of it all? That kind of thinking created a lot of anxiety and stress in my young mind. Now, do I believe that I was manipulated into all of this? Well, it depends on whether or not I've got my tinfoil hat on. I don't believe anyone forced me to research the Mayans or Nostradamus. That was all on me. And the religious side of things, well, we've already talked about that. However, give me a minute to adjust my tinfoil hat. I do believe there were times when things like these predictions are used as scare tactics. Raise your hand if you remember the craziness of 1999 and Y2K. That's a perfect example of how something can be used to manipulate emotions. I remember family members wanting to become preppers, truly believing the world was going to end the moment the clock struck midnight. When we believe the world is out of our control, that there's nothing we can do to change it, we start living in hopelessness and despair. We move through each day with anxiety and stress. We live half lives, waiting for the end. I don't know about you, but that's not the life I want. I don't want to live without hope for change in my world. And honestly, I don't think you want to either. So, how do we change things? Well, if you can believe this, I've got a story for you. In my life, you can't make this shit up. That's one of our favorite sayings around here. While I was in the middle of writing this script, we had a huge March storm. I'm talking the biggest dumping of snow in one day in my area since 1956, like storm of the century level. My little family lives in a sixplex, and the day after the storm, all of our vehicles were buried under several feet of snow. We get a message that the plow guy is on his way to clear out the parking lot. Now, keep in mind, my partner, who is usually the one helping other people when they get stuck in the winter, had gotten stuck trying to move his own truck. This was a big deal. Anyway, him and I head outside to do what we can to try and get out of the parking lot along with our neighbors. And pretty quickly, we all realized we weren't going anywhere. So what happened? Well, almost all of the cars had to be pulled out by the plow guy. One by one, the vehicles were dug out enough for my partner to hook up tow straps, and the plow guy pulled us out. One of the neighbors stood at the entrance to direct traffic, so we all knew it was safe to go. And as one person finished digging themselves out, we all turned around and helped the next neighbor. No one was asked, no one was directed. from teenagers to 70-year-olds, different ethnic backgrounds, different religions, and while I didn't ask, I'm sure different political leanings too. We all just came together and tackled the piles of snow. That's where change starts. Change starts when we take accountability and begin shifting how we approach our world, not on a grand scale, but on a micro, individual level. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Leo Tolstoy. One person can make a difference. Agency versus identity. In the previous 2 episodes, Surviving to Thriving, Why Language Matters, and Gremlins in the Head, Who's Really Talking, we talked about the language we use with the world and with ourselves. We talked about regulation and why it's so important to pause and reflect. Those conversations mattered because we needed that foundation before we could expand this work and start applying it to our lived realities. Before we move forward, I want to stress again that I'm not here to debate people's beliefs. I'm simply pointing out patterns as I see them. Which brings me to identity politics and how it can be an example of emotional manipulation when it's used in certain ways. At its core, identity politics refers to political positions and social movements based on shared experiences, injustices, and interests of specific social groups, defined by things like race, gender, sexuality, or religion. Rather than broader, universal platforms, it often aims to create recognition, equity, and change for those groups. But, like anything else, there can be drawbacks depending on how it's approached. When taken to an extreme, it can start to limit individual accountability. It can shift into a kind of tribal mindset where there's less room for individual thought or for questioning within the group. It can also create a dynamic where there's always a quote-unquote big bad to fight against, where blame gets placed outward, sometimes at the expense of personal reflection or responsibility. Don't get me wrong, I don't think identity politics are inherently wrong. I think we all need to feel seen and heard, especially when we're talking about social and economic realities. However, when we stop questioning and start reacting as a group, we begin to give up personal agency, and that's where manipulation has power. Personal agency is your ability to choose how you show up in your own life. It's not just reacting to whatever's happening around you. It's deciding your next move on purpose. It's you saying, nah, I've got a say in this. It's built through awareness, self-control, and learning how to pause before you react. And the more you use it, the stronger it gets, just like a muscle. It builds confidence. It helps you handle life without spiraling. And it reminds you that you're not just along for the ride, you're driving the damn car. Spirit didn't hand you a life just to watch it happen to you. And yeah, it scares the hell out of anything that thrives on total control. Because when you choose personal agency over groupthink, you don't just change your life, you start to change the world. Let's not generalize. One way we can start returning to our own agency is by catching ourselves when we overgeneralize. Because we all do it. We all use statements that start like, people who think like blank, people who believe blank, people who vote like blank. And the moment we do that, we take the individual out of the experience. We stop seeing people and start seeing categories. Let's look at what happened during the global pandemic as an example of overgeneralization. Now, yes, I agree that definitions can change over time. I'm not arguing with that. However, it was interesting to watch how certain terms shifted. Before the pandemic, an anti-vaxxer was generally understood to be someone who opposed vaccines entirely, often people who didn't want to put chemicals into their bodies. It was an umbrella term, but it had a fairly clear definition. During the pandemic, though, the term became more loaded, and in many cases, more weaponized. It started being used to describe anyone who opposed vaccination, often with the added assumption that they were spreading misinformation or refusing to engage with evidence. Before the pandemic, anti-vaccination was often viewed as a personal choice. During the pandemic, it became framed as an irresponsible decision, one that was seen as putting society at risk. So, in the case of the pandemic, it often got simplified down to the idea that anyone who opposed the vaccination was doing it just because they wanted to. And that kind of thinking strips away the nuance of real life, because there were a lot of different reasons people had questions or concerns. To reduce it all down to irresponsible people is, in and of itself, a bit irresponsible. When we think in black and white, we miss the beauty of the infinite, intricate grays. Our world isn't black and white, and our thinking shouldn't be either. A ripple in the pond. Think for a moment about throwing a rock into a pond. The ripples start small and grow as they move away from the point of impact. Now, imagine several people throwing rocks into that same pond in different places. The ripples begin to meet, overlap, and affect each other. They change the surface of the water, and that's what happens when we choose individual agency. When we ask questions, when we form our own opinions, when we stand in our own power, we begin to break the narrative that we are powerless. Radical change doesn't have to be chaotic or loud. It doesn't have to create fear. And it doesn't have to wrestle power away. Radical change can be simple, one choice at a time. When we choose to question what we're being told, when we choose empathy and compassion, when we choose to see our similarities instead of our differences, when we choose personal connection over generalization, when we choose to look at our lives through a lens of wonder and possibility instead of hopelessness and despair, when we choose, we set the example. We make it easier for the person sitting next to us to make a choice. It reminds me of one of my favorite sayings from South African Bishop Desmond Tutu. There is only one way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. We can change our world if we choose to change ourselves. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the quiet moments, in the choices no one else sees. And those choices, they matter more than you think. You may never see how far your ripple goes, but that doesn't mean it isn't changing the water. It's like planting a tree you may never sit under. We do it so the next generation has shade. It's time for a Tarot Truth Bomb, where Spirit speaks through the cards and I don't sugarcoat the message. As I shuffle, ask yourself, where in my life am I reacting instead of choosing? Where have I been generalizing people instead of seeing the individual? What belief or narrative have I accepted without questioning? Where am I giving my power away to group thinking instead of trusting my own perspective? What would shift if I paused and chose my response with intention instead of emotion? How can I create a small ripple of change in my world today? Today's card is the King of Cups. The King of Cups is the person who stays emotionally steady even when everyone else is getting swept up in the noise. He feels everything, but he's not ruled by it. Where groupthink says, go with the crowd, the King of Cups says, pause. What actually feels true for me? He represents emotional sovereignty, the ability to make choices from a grounded, self-aware place instead of reacting to pressure, fear, or collective energy. In group dynamics, he doesn't need to dominate or rebel loudly. He simply doesn't abandon himself to belonging. He listens, observes, and then chooses with intention, even if that choice is different from everyone else. The truth of this card is this: you can be compassionate, understanding, and still choose your own path. Empathy doesn't require conformity. Spirit said what it said. Spirit didn't stutter. Take it in, sit with it, and do what you will with it. All right, now it's time for a spirit side eye, because some of y'all are out here playing with energy like karma won't slap you in the back of the head. This spirit side eye is for the performative activism that shows up without listening. The kind that says it wants to help this group or that group, but never actually pauses to hear what those groups are saying. You know the energy. The one that gets offended on behalf of everyone, takes up causes quickly, and doesn't always stop to ask if there's really something there that needs their voice. Like, I get it, Karen. You want to help. But what or who are you actually helping? Virtue signaling isn't what you think it is. And while we're at it, not everything needs to be posted online, because real change and real work takes effort. It happens quietly. It happens consistently. Not for the likes, not for the views, but because it's the right thing to do. That was your spirit side eye. Now go sage your space and mind your magical business. I know that no matter what I say, there will be times when the world feels too big, like I can't make a difference. And in those moments, maybe this is what I need to come back to. The world doesn't need more noise. It doesn't need more sides, more labels, or more reasons to divide. Maybe what it needs is more people willing to pause, to question, and to choose differently. Because change doesn't start out there. It starts in the small, quiet moments when you decide how you're going to show up, even when no one's watching. And those moments, that's where the ripple begins. That's it for today's brew. If something stirred your soul, stirred your sass, or made you side-eye your life choices in the best way possible, pass it on. And don't forget to follow, rate, and share your thoughts on any of our socials. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Spirit Gumbo. In our next episode, we're diving into cognitive dissonance. How ideas once dismissed as conspiracy are often revisited, relabeled, and reabsorbed. and how questioning certain narratives has been quietly discouraged through ridicule and social pressure. Until next time, this ain't just talk. This is Spirit Gumbo with CQ.